Welcome to another report by Medical Arts. Today we are diving deep into something many of you probably interact with every single day, coffee.
That daily ritual.
Exactly. But we are not just talking about, your standard morning cup. We are looking at its role in the world of biohacking.
Right, that whole do-it-yourself approach to optimizing your health and performance.
You shared a really fascinating collection of information on this, everything from the chemicals in coffee to specific things like bulletproof coffee.
Yeah, there's a lot out there. So our mission today really is to unpack what the science actually says about using coffee to boost your brain, your body, your overall well-being.
Trying to cut through the hype, basically.
Precisely. Focus on the evidence-based stuff.
Okay, so we'll explore those key compounds in coffee, like caffeine, obviously, but also things like chlorogenic acids. See what they actually do.
And their established effects, yeah. On the brain, on the body.
And then we'll get into those popular biohacking strategies people use with coffee, like when to drink it, adding fats, all that stuff.
And we need to critically evaluate the science, or sometimes the lack of science, behind those claims.
Absolutely. Prepare for, hopefully, some surprising facts, maybe a few laughs.
We can hope. And ideally, a much clearer picture of how coffee really works with our biology when we're trying to, self-optimize.
All right, let's get started.
Let's do it.
Okay, so first up, biohacking. It sounds very futuristic, doesn't it? Like upgrading ourselves.
It does have that ring to it. But in this context, biohacking is really more about taking a hands-on, do-it-yourself approach to your own biology.
Okay, DIY biology. What does that mean in practice?
It means making intentional changes, trying to improve your health, your performance, mental, physical, maybe even extend your longevity.
So less about treating disease and more about optimization, becoming better.
Exactly. It's about taking control of your physiology, not just accepting the baseline.
Right. So what kind of things do people actually do when they say they're biohacking? Give me some examples.
Oh, it's a pretty wide spectrum. A lot of it involves lifestyle and diet changes, things you've probably heard of, like intermittent fasting.
Yeah, different eating windows.
Right, or ketogenic diets, very low carb, high fat. And then there's a big focus on sleep optimization, using trackers, specific routines, trying to really dial in sleep quality.
Okay, those sound familiar from the general wellness space.
They definitely overlap. Then you get into things like environmental stressors, deliberately exposing yourself to cold, like cold showers, or heat, like saunas.
Right, hormesis, that kind of idea. Stressing the body a little to make it stronger.
Kind of, yeah. Mindfulness practices like meditation are big too for stress management. And then there's supplementation, vitamins, minerals, but also things called nootropics.
Nootropics, brain boosters, right?
Supposedly, yes. And actually, caffeine itself is often considered a natural nootropic.
So my morning coffee habit is biohacking after all. I feel very cutting edge now.
In a way. And technology plays a big part too. Wearables, smartwatches, fitness trackers, constantly gathering data.
Data.
Exactly. Some biohackers go further, exploring things like nutrigenomics, how food interacts with your specific genes, or even actual do-it-yourself biology experiments, though that's more niche.
Wow, okay. So it ranges from just like skipping breakfast sometimes all the way to potentially more extreme stuff.
Yeah.
It does sound like a lot of these are just new names for old ideas, though. Isn't getting good sleep always a good idea?
You absolutely hit on a key point there. Many biohacking practices are essentially modern rebrandings of well-established health advice. Fasting isn't new. Sleep hygiene isn't new. Using caffeine isn't new.
So what makes it biohacking?
I think it's the emphasis on self-experimentation, on meticulous data tracking, often using that technology, and this real focus on optimizing performance, going beyond just not being sick.
And sometimes maybe pushing things a bit further than traditional advice would suggest.
That can happen, yeah. So when we talk specifically about coffee biohacks, we need to be mindful of this. Are we just looking at the known effects of coffee, or are we seeing claims built on, let's say, less solid ground?
Right, because the science behind these hacks can vary a lot.
Hugely. We know a fair bit about caffeine, for example. That's well studied. But other claims might be based more on anecdotes or, frankly, just marketing hype.
Okay, critical thinking caps on then. Let's get into the actual coffee science. It's more than just brown liquid, I gather. What's actually in my cup?
Oh, definitely. Coffee is incredibly complex chemically. There are over 1,000 identified bioactive compounds in there.
1,000? Wow.
Yeah. The exact mix depends on the bean, the growing conditions, processing, and especially the roasting method. But we can talk about key families of compounds.
Okay, lay the chemistry on me.
All right, so first you have alkaloids. That includes the superstar caffeine, but also another compound called trigonelline.
Trigonelline, never heard of it.
Most haven't. Then you've got polyphenols. The big players here are chlorogenic acids, or CGAs. Coffee is a major source of these.
Polyphenols, antioxidants, right?
Exactly. We also find diterpenes, like cafestol and kawil, and finally, complex molecules called melanoidins, which form during roasting.
Okay, quite a chemical soup. Let's start with caffeine. We all know it wakes us up. But what are its established effects on our thinking, beyond just feeling less tired?
Good question. So, beyond just counteracting sleepiness, caffeine is consistently shown to increase alertness, vigilance, meaning staying focused over time, attention, and reaction time. It reduces that feeling of fatigue.
Okay, sharper, faster.
And it can provide a bit of a mood boost, make you feel more energetic. However, when you look at more complex cognitive functions, things like learning, memory, problem-solving, the effects are less consistent.
Meaning the studies are mixed.
Yeah, the results vary quite a bit. Some show benefits, some don't. Some even show slight impairments in certain tasks. It's not a straightforward makes you smarter drug.
So maybe it's more about getting you back to baseline if you're tired, rather than pushing you significantly above baseline.
That's a really good way to think about it. A lot of research suggests its main cognitive benefit might be reversing performance deficits caused by fatigue or boredom, rather than genuinely enhancing peak cognitive ability.
Interesting distinction. Okay, what about the physical side? Pre-workout coffee is a huge thing.
And for good reason. Caffeine is one of the most well-established ergogenic aids out there.
Ergogenic meaning performance enhancing.
Exactly. It's particularly effective for aerobic endurance activities, running, cycling, that kind of thing. But there's also decent evidence it can benefit muscular endurance, power output, and even strength. Maybe not quite as consistently as endurance, but the benefit seems to be there.
Okay. Is there an optimal dose for that athletic boost?
The research generally points to a range of about 3 to 6 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight. So yeah, it requires a little calculation based on your weight.
Got it. And how does it work? What's it doing in the body to help us perform better?
It's working on multiple levels. It stimulates the central nervous system that alertness helps. It seems to improve neuromuscular recruitment, basically how well your brain talks to your muscles.
Better connection.
Right. It can increase calcium release within muscle cells, which is crucial for muscle contraction.
Yeah.
And there's the metabolic effect. It can increase fat mobilization, encouraging your body to use fat for fuel.
Which could stir muscle glycogen, right, helping you go longer.
That's the theory, the glycogen sparing effect. Plus, it reduces your perception of effort. It makes the workout feel a bit less grueling.
Okay, caffeine's a serious player then. Now, what about those other compounds you mentioned? Chlorogenic acids and polyphenols. They sound healthy.
They are. Coffee is a really significant source of these in many people's diets. Chlorogenic acids, in particular, are potent antioxidants.
Fighting those free radicals.
Exactly. And they also have anti-inflammatory effects. They can help modulate some of the body's inflammatory pathways.
Antioxidant, anti-inflammatory. Always good things to hear. What else?
Well, they seem to impact glucose and lipid metabolism. They might improve insulin sensitivity, for example. This could be one reason why regular coffee drinking is consistently linked to a lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes.
Ah, interesting link there.
There's also some evidence suggesting potential cardiovascular benefits, though the data on blood pressure is a bit mixed. And they might have neuroprotective effects protecting brain cells.
Protecting brain cells. Like long-term.
Potentially, yeah. This might contribute to the observed links between coffee consumption and lower risk of diseases like Parkinson's and possibly Alzheimer's.
So while caffeine grabs the headlines for the immediate kick, these CGAs might be doing important background work for long-term health.
That seems plausible, yes. But interestingly, the evidence for CGAs alone providing an acute, immediate cognitive boost like caffeine does is pretty limited. Taking CGA supplements doesn't seem to make people suddenly sharper in the short term.
So their benefits are likely more chronic, building up over time.
That seems to be the case, more about long-term cellular health and metabolic function.
Okay, and quickly, what about the others? Diterpenes, trigonelline, melanoidins?
Right. Diterpenes, cafestol, and kawal are found mostly in unfiltered coffee, like French press or Turkish coffee. They have some potential anti-inflammatory and even anti-cancer properties in lab studies.
But there's always a but.
But they can also raise LDL cholesterol levels, the bad cholesterol in some individuals. Filtration removes most of them.
Good to know. Trigonine.
That might have some neuroprotective effects too. It contributes to coffee's bitterness and actually breaks down into niacin vitamin B3 during roasting.
Oh, wow. And melanoidins.
Those are complex brown compounds formed during roasting. They contribute to the color, aroma, and body of coffee, and they also have antioxidant activity.
So it really sounds like the overall effect of coffee isn't just caffeine, it's this whole symphony of compounds working together.
Absolutely. And the roasting process significantly changes that symphony, right? It affects the levels of all these things.
Yeah, you mentioned CDAs decrease while melanoidins increase.
Exactly. So a light roast and a dark roast aren't chemically identical, which means they could have subtly different biological effects. It adds another layer of complexity.
Fascinating stuff. Okay,
Yeah.
So armed with this chemistry knowledge, how are biohackers specifically trying to use coffee to boost brain power? What are the common tactics?
Well, the main goal is pretty clear. Use coffee, primarily the caffeine, as a nootropic to enhance focus, alertness, concentration, productivity, standard stuff. But the how involves specific strategies around timing and dosage.
Right. Let's talk timing first. I've definitely heard this one. Delaying your first coffee in the morning. What's that all about?
Yeah, that's a very popular biohacking recommendation. The idea is typically to wait maybe 60 to 120 minutes after waking up before having that first cup.
Why wait? Don't most people reach for it immediately?
They do. The rationale has two parts. First, it's about your natural cortisol awakening response. Cortisol naturally peaks in the morning to help wake you up. The theory is that drinking caffeine when cortisol is already high might make the caffeine less effective or maybe even mess with that natural rhythm.
Okay, don't interfere with the natural wake-up call. What's the second part?
It involves adenosine. Adenosine builds up in your brain throughout the day, making you feel sleepy. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors. When you first wake up, adenosine levels are naturally low.
Right, because you just cleared it out while sleeping.
Exactly. So the argument is, if you wait a bit, adenosine levels will rise slightly. Then, when you introduce caffeine, it has more adenosine to block, potentially giving you a bigger alertness boost later when your natural cortisol starts to dip.
It sounds plausible, biochemically speaking. But is there solid evidence that this delayed strategy actually leads to superior cognitive performance?
That's the crucial question. While the physiology, the cortisol curve, the adenosine mechanism is real, the direct scientific evidence specifically showing that delaying coffee makes your brain work better compared to drinking it right away. Well, it's pretty scarce.
So it's an interesting hypothesis based on known mechanisms, but not really a proven hack.
Exactly. It's often presented with more certainty than the evidence warrants. It's more theory than validated practice for superior cognition.
Okay. What other timing strategies are common?
The mid-afternoon pick-me-up is obviously huge. Using coffee to fight that post-lunch slump, that's probably the most common biohack most people practice without even calling it that.
Guilty as charged. Works for me.
Right. And sometimes people combine this with a caffeine nap, drink coffee, take a quick 20-minute nap, and wake up as the caffeine kicks in.
I've heard of that. Does it work?
Some small studies suggest it can be more effective for alertness than just coffee or just a nap alone. Another key timing strategy is setting a strict caffeine cutoff time before bed.
Like no coffee after 2 p.m.
Something like that, yeah. Often 8 to 10 hours before bedtime is recommended to avoid disrupting sleep architecture. That aligns with general sleep hygiene advice, really.
Makes sense. What about dosage and frequency?
Biohackers often emphasize self-tracking, paying close attention to how you personally respond to different amounts of caffeine, finding your sweet spot dose for focus without getting jittery or crashing later.
The N1 experiment.
Exactly. Some also advocate for smaller, more frequent doses throughout the day instead of 1 or 2 big hits, aiming for more sustained energy levels. Consistency is also sometimes mentioned, drinking coffee at the same times each day to make self-tracking easier.
Okay, so lots of tweaking involved. But zooming out again, based on the broader science, how much does caffeine really enhance our thinking beyond just alertness?
As we touched on, the evidence strongly supports caffeine for alertness, attention, reaction time, and reducing fatigue. But for those higher order functions, memory, learning, complex reasoning, the evidence is much less consistent.
So it helps you stay awake and focused on the task, but doesn't necessarily make you better at the task itself.
That's a good summary of the current state of research. Some reviews suggest the benefits are mainly in sustained attention and processing speed, while effects on things like memory consolidation or executive function are more debatable, sometimes even negative depending on the task.
And the perceived boost might just be overcoming tiredness or withdrawal.
That's definitely a factor. If you're a regular drinker, some of that perceived sharpness might just be bringing you back to normal by alleviating withdrawal symptoms like headache or fatigue. And never underestimate the placebo effect.
True. So that delayed morning coffee idea sounds cool, but not scientifically proven to be superior for brain function.
Correct. The underlying physiology is interesting, but direct comparative studies on cognitive outcomes are really lacking in the material we reviewed. It's an appealing narrative, but not yet a validated optimization strategy based on strong evidence.
Got it. Okay, let's shift focus to the body. How are biohackers using coffee for physical performance and maybe changing their metabolism? What are the goals there?
The main goals usually revolve around boosting endurance, increasing power, fighting off fatigue during exercise, trying to accelerate fat burning, and helping with weight management.
Okay, and what are the proposed mechanisms? How is coffee supposed to help with all that?
For performance, again, that central nervous system stimulation is key alertness, reduced perception of effort. Then there are effects at the muscle level, possibly better nerve-to-muscle signaling, enhanced calcium release for contractions, maybe even boosting energy production enzymes within the muscle cells.
And for metabolism and fat burning?
Caffeine stimulates the release of adrenaline, which signals fat cells to release fatty acids into the bloodstream. That's lipolysis. The idea is that these fatty acids can then be used for fuel.
So burning more fat during exercise?
Potentially, yes. And as we mentioned, maybe sparing muscle glycogen, which is particularly relevant for endurance. Some also talk about a slight increase in metabolic rate or thermogenesis, burning more calories at rest, though this effect is usually quite small and temporary.
Okay, sounds like it hits on several fronts. What are the common strategies biohackers use here?
Timing is crucial again. The standard advice is to consume caffeine about 30 to 60 minutes before exercise, hitting that 3 to 6 milligram per kilogram dose range we talked about. This aims to sync peak caffeine levels in the blood with the workout.
Makes sense. What else?
Many focus on endurance exercise since that's where the benefits are most strongly supported. For fat burning specifically, some target that pre-exercise caffeine dose before moderate intensity cardio. And there's that interesting finding suggesting afternoon exercise with caffeine might maximize fat oxidation.
That afternoon effect again. Intriguing.
It is. And then there's the whole area of fasted training support, using coffee, sometimes bulletproof coffee, before exercising without eating beforehand.
Why do that? To burn more fat.
That's often the goal, yeah.
No.
To enhance fat mobilization further, or simply to make training in a fasted state feel more tolerable, less draining.
Okay, so the pre-workout caffeine for endurance seems solid. But what about the fat burning aspect? Does drinking coffee really melt fat away?
While the evidence confirms that caffeine does acutely increase fat oxidation during exercise, your body burns a higher percentage of fat for fuel in that session.
But I sense another but coming.
But translating that short-term shift into significant long-term body fat loss is not straightforward. Ultimately, losing body fat comes down to consistently being in a calorie deficit. Just burning more fat during one workout doesn't guarantee overall fat loss if you compensate by eating more later, or if your total energy expenditure doesn't increase significantly.
So it helps burn fat during the workout, but isn't a magic weight loss solution on its own?
Exactly. It's a tool that might help slightly, but diet and overall energy balance are far more important for long-term fat loss. And about that afternoon fat burning study, it's interesting, suggests timing might matter for acute effects, but needs more confirmation before becoming solid advice.
Okay, good dose of reality there.
Yeah.
Now we have to talk about it. Bulletproof coffee. It's practically the poster child for coffee biohacking. Remind us what it is exactly.
Right. Bulletproof coffee, or BPC, it's a specific recipe. Brewed coffee, usually claimed to be low toxin, blended with unsalted grass-fed butter or ghee, and medium-chain triglyceride, or MCT oil, often specifically the C8 type.
Blended, so it's like a frothy, oily coffee.
Pretty much. And it's often consumed first thing in the morning, typically replacing breakfast.
Butter and oil instead of breakfast. Okay. Why? What are the claimed benefits driving people to do this?
Proponents claim it delivers sustained energy without the jitters or crash associated with regular coffee. They say it enhances mental clarity and focus, suppresses hunger for hours, and supports fat burning, especially within a ketogenic or low-carb lifestyle.
Sustained energy, focus, fat burning. Sounds like the biohacker's dream. What's the proposed science behind these claims? How does adding fats supposedly achieve this?
There are a few key ideas. The MCT oil is metabolized differently than other fats. It's rapidly converted by the liver into ketones.
Ketones, the alternative fuel source the brain can use, especially on low-carb diets.
Exactly. So the claim is that these ketones provide a clean, stable energy source for the brain, leading to better focus. Second, the high-fat content from both the butter and MCT oil is thought to slow down the absorption of caffeine from the coffee,
leading to that sustained energy without the spike and crash.
That's the theory. Third, the sheer amount of fat is proposed to increase satiety feelings of fullness, which helps curb hunger and might reduce overall calorie intake later in the day.
Makes sense. Fat is generally satiating.
And finally, there's often an emphasis on the quality of the ingredients. Grass-fed butter having a better fatty acid profile, clean coffee being free of mycotoxins, specific C8 MCT oil being the most ketogenic.
Okay, lots of claims there. Let's unpack the MCT oil part first. Ketones for brain fuel. Does the science back that up for healthy people seeking a cognitive boost?
This is where the claims meet some friction with the evidence. While MCT oil does reliably increase ketone levels, the research on whether this translates to significant cognitive benefits in healthy adults is, well, limited and inconsistent.
So more ketones doesn't automatically mean better thinking for the average person.
Not necessarily, no. Some studies show minor improvements on specific tasks, maybe after prolonged use, but many others find no difference compared to a placebo. The healthy brain is generally very efficient at using glucose, its preferred fuel. The potential benefit of ketones as an alternative fuel seems more relevant, though still debated, in conditions where brain glucose metabolism might be impaired, like in Alzheimer's disease or mild cognitive impairment.
So the ketone brain fuel angle might be overstated for healthy individuals just looking for an edge.
Based on the current evidence, yes, that specific mechanism seems less likely to provide a major cognitive advantage in a healthy glucose-fueled brain.
Okay, what about MCT oil for physical performance or fat burning on its own?
Similar story for performance. Reviews generally conclude that MCT oil supplementation doesn't significantly improve endurance performance in healthy, trained individuals. For fat burning, it can increase fat oxidation slightly and boost ketone levels, but it doesn't seem to drastically shift overall fuel use during exercise, especially if carbs are available. It might enhance satiety and potentially aid weight loss if used to replace other fats within a calorie-controlled diet, but just adding it on top won't likely cause fat loss.
Right, so what happens when you combine MCT oil with caffeine, like in bulletproof coffee? Is there some magic synergy?
There's actually very little direct research on that specific combination's effects on performance or cognition compared to just coffee. One study did find that caffeine can enhance the ketogenic effect of MCT oil, meaning you get even higher ketone levels when you combine them.
But does that lead to better performance or thinking?
That link remains unclear from the available evidence. Some studies looking at metabolic responses during exercise found no significant difference between caffeine plus MCT oil versus caffeine alone.
So it sounds like many of the perceived benefits of bulletproof coffee might just be the caffeine working its usual magic, plus maybe feeling full from all the fat.
That's a very likely explanation. The caffeine provides the alertness and focus boost. The high fat load definitely increases satiety, which can feel like stable energy because you're not hungry. And the placebo effect, expecting it to work, is probably playing a role too.
And those claims about the special clean coffee or grass-fed butter being crucially important.
Those claims about superior quality offering unique benefits lack strong comparative scientific evidence. While grass-fed butter might have a slightly different fatty acid profile, whether it makes a functional difference in this context is unproven. The clean coffee idea regarding mycotoxins is also controversial and often used more for marketing.
Okay, so the BPC hype might be running a bit ahead of the science. Let's try to really nail down what's fact versus fiction across all these coffee biohacks. Cognitive enhancement first. What's solid? What's shaky?
Okay, fact. Caffeine reliably enhances alertness, attention, reaction speed, and reduces feelings of fatigue. That's solid. Also fact. Long-term, moderate coffee consumption is associated with a reduced risk of neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's, likely due to multiple compounds, not just caffeine.
Okay, and the fiction or unproven side?
Fiction or unproven. That delaying your morning coffee provides superior cognitive benefits compared to drinking it earlier lacks strong support. Also unproven, that bulletproof coffee significantly boosts cognition beyond the effects of caffeine in healthy individuals. And the idea that caffeine consistently enhances higher-order cognitive functions like complex problem-solving or memory is debatable and lacks consistent evidence.
Right. Now, physical performance and fat burning.
Facts. Fact. Caffeine is a proven ergogenic aid, improving endurance performance and potentially strength and power. Fact. Caffeine acutely increases fat oxidation during exercise.
And the fiction or unproven parts there.
Fiction or unproven, that MCT oil provides significant endurance benefits for healthy athletes. Also, that the acute increase in fat burning from caffeine or MCTs directly translates to substantial long-term fat loss without considering overall calorie balance. And the idea of a powerful synergistic fat burning effect from combining caffeine and fasted training needs more robust investigation.
Okay, and putting bulletproof coffee under the microscope again.
The critique is that it relies heavily on anecdote. Limited independent studies show no cognitive or alertness advantage over regular black coffee. The satiety claim has more basis due to the high fat content, but there are valid concerns about the high saturated fat intake and the potential for displacing more nutrient-dense foods, especially when used as a meal replacement.
And that self-experimentation approach, the N1 thing, while appealing, has its downsides too, right?
Absolutely. It's highly susceptible to the placebo effect and confirmation bias you want it to work, so you perceive that it does. The popularity of things like BPC seems driven more by compelling stories and marketing than by rigorous, replicated scientific findings. Claims can also misattribute effects, crediting ketones for effects largely driven by caffeine or satiety.
Good points. So while experimenting can be interesting, we need to be aware of the potential downsides and risks. What should people look out for?
Definitely. Starting with caffeine itself too much can cause problems. Anxiety, jitters, insomnia are common. Dependency and withdrawal symptoms, headaches, fatigue are real. It can also cause digestive upset in some people and temporarily raise heart rate and blood pressure.
So moderation is key. What's considered moderate?
Generally, up to 400 milligrams of caffeine per day is considered safe for most healthy adults. That's roughly 4 8-ounce cups of brewed coffee, but it varies a lot.
Okay. What about the specific risks of things like bulletproof coffee?
The main concern is the very high saturated fat content from the butter and MCT oil. This can significantly raise LDL cholesterol, the bad kind, particularly in people who are genetically predisposed or hyper-responders to dietary saturated fat. Over time, high LDL is a major risk factor for cardiovascular disease.
So potentially bad for heart health long-term for some people?
Yes, and there's a nutrient displacement issue we mentioned. If BPC replaces a balanced breakfast, you're missing out on protein, fiber, essential vitamins, and minerals. It's mostly just fat and caffeine.
Not a complete meal, nutritionally speaking. Any risks specific to MCT oil itself?
The most common side effects are digestive, diarrhea, cramping, nausea, especially when starting or taking large doses. That's why starting low and increasing gradually is advised. There's also some conflicting data on whether it might raise triglycerides in some people, so moderation is probably wise there too.
Okay. And you touched on this earlier, adrenal fatigue. People sometimes link that to burnout and high caffeine use. What's the scientific take?
It's really important to be clear here. Adrenal fatigue is not a recognized medical diagnosis by endocrinologists or the broader medical community. Your adrenal glands are actually very robust. Attributing vague symptoms like chronic tiredness to this non-existent condition is problematic.
Why is problematic?
Because it can delay someone from seeking diagnosis and treatment for actual underlying medical conditions that could be causing their symptoms, things like depression, sleep apnea, thyroid disorders, anemia, and many others. Plus, the supplements often marketed for adrenal fatigue are unproven and potentially harmful or a waste of money.
Good to clarify that. So putting it all together, it sounds like individual responses to all this stuff, caffeine, fats, MCTs, can vary hugely.
Massively. Genetics play a role in caffeine metabolism and sensitivity. Your tolerance level matters. Your baseline health status matters. How you react to saturated fat or MCT oil can differ significantly from person to person. This is why one-size-fits-all biohacking protocols can be ineffective or even harmful for some.
Personalization is key.
Yes, and ideally, that personalization should involve some self-awareness, perhaps some objective tracking, but also guidance from a healthcare professional if you have underlying conditions or are considering extreme practices. The risks often come from pushing things too far. Moderation remains crucial.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive on coffee and biohacking, what's the main message you want our listeners to take away?
I think the big picture is this. Coffee itself, that simple brewed bean, definitely has some genuine evidence-based benefits. The caffeine boost for alertness and physical performance is real. The antioxidants are beneficial. These things do align with some biohacking goals.
But when you get into the specific, often more elaborate coffee biohacks,
That's where the picture gets much more nuanced, yeah. especially things involving added fats like MCT oil and butter. While the narratives around things like bulletproof coffee are really compelling, the rigorous scientific support for many of the amplified claims, particularly significant cognitive enhancement in healthy folks, just isn't consistently there yet.
So what feels like a miracle hack might just be caffeine doing its job, or feeling full from fat, or just believing it works.
Exactly. It could easily be the well-known effects of caffeine, the satiety from fat, the placebo effect, or a combination of all three. It's crucial to distinguish those from novel, scientifically validated benefits attributed to this specific hack.
So the key takeaway for our listeners, the curious learners out there, is probably to approach these trends with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Absolutely. Prioritize evidence over hype. Pay attention to your own body's response, honestly and critically. Practice moderation more isn't always better, especially with caffeine or added fats, and always consider the potential risks.
Especially if you're making drastic changes or have health issues. Talking to a doctor or registered dietitian is probably a good idea then.
Always a wise move in those cases. They can help you understand the potential benefits and risks in the context of your individual health.
Right. Well, this exploration has been fascinating, but it really just scratches the surface of coffee, biohacking, and how it all interacts with our bodies.
It really does. There's always more to learn. Hopefully this gives people a good framework for thinking critically about these trends.
So what other questions do you, our listeners, have about optimizing well-being? What other biohacks are you curious about? We definitely encourage you to keep digging into the evidence for yourself. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today.